Welcome, and thanks for joining this information session on the Oregon Wildfire Risk Map. We're providing an overview of tonight's agenda, some housekeeping for the virtual forum, and then we'll get started. My name is Tim Hoffman. I'll be your facilitator. I'm with ODF Public Affairs. First, I'd like to introduce our panelist, Tim Holzbach, Deputy Chief of Policy and Planning for the Fire Protection Division of ODF. Dr. Chris Dunn, Assistant Professor of Wildfire Risk Science in the College of Forestry at Oregon State University. And also helping to facilitate tonight will be Jason Cox and Levi Hopkins from ODF. A quick rundown of the agenda. We'll have opening remarks from Senator Jeff Golden. Then we'll have Oregon Department of Forestry remarks from Chief Mike Shaw. There'll be a presentation on rules, notifications, and the appeal process from Tim Holzbach. Then there'll be a presentation on wildfire risk and the wildland-urban interface mapping from Chris Dunn, followed by a question and answer session that I'll be facilitating along with Jason. A few housekeeping items. The chat feature tonight in the Zoom webinar will only be used to post some resources for your reference and links to ODF's wildfire risk page, ODF's appeals webpage, the webpage for the Division of Financial Regulation that addresses insurance, and the Building Codes Division that's responsible for home hardening. We ask that you please wait till the end of the presentations for questions. We're scheduled to run from 7 to 8, but we have over 900 participants, so we plan to run past 8 o'clock and answer as many questions as we can. When we get to your questions, we ask that you use the raise hand feature, and I'll call on you in the order the questions are received. That feature will allow you to unmute yourself and ask your question of the presenters. And then we ask that you also to lower your hand after you're done so we can move on to the next question. We understand there are a lot of questions and concerns about the map and future requirements, so we ask that we have a respectful dialogue tonight. And with that, I'll introduce Senator Jeff Gordon, who's representing District 3 in Ashland, and he's also the chair for the Committee on Natural Resources and Wildfire Recovery. Go ahead, Senator.
Well, hello, thank you. I am Jeff Golden, representing Senate District 3, most of the Rogue Valley in the State Senate. Thank you all for coming. Thanks for the opportunity to make a few comments. I actually wrote them and put them down because otherwise I kind of ramble, and we don't have time tonight for rambling. So this is the first of what we've been assured will be several public conversations on the wildfire program before it's finalized, and some will be in person, which is much better for this purpose than Zoom is. I've heard from a fair number of people since the risk notifications letters went out. Quite a few are puzzled, and some are really angry. Tonight's a chance for some of that concern to be addressed and for us to leave here with more clarity on where this program's going. I think we are at a really historic and a very challenging point right now. Most of us have heard about this wildfire program that's on the way for quite a while, but until now, it's all been kind of abstract, something that's going to happen at some point. But when people started getting letters about new regulations that could apply to their property, the rubber starts hitting the road, and that's what makes this a tough moment. I think some of the stress here comes from rumors and social media claims about how punishing all this is going to be on Oregonians that just aren't true. It would also not be true to say that we're not going to require anything of Oregonians or do anything that could possibly impose any new cost on anybody, because the point we've reached is too urgent and too critical to be able to say that. So before I turn the mic over, let me touch quickly on 3 points. One, we've known from the start that this map and really all aspects of the program would be much less than perfect at the start. We also knew we didn't have the luxury of deliberating for a lot of more years to make it close to perfect, because our communities are burning down now pretty much every summer. We knew we needed a bold program and needed it fast, and that meant launching soon and then constantly course correcting as we learned more. That course correction is in the hands of a wildfire council of 19 Oregonians representing very different interests, including leaders of the property rights movement in this state. One of the things that will definitely change and improve is this map. I'm hoping we'll learn more tonight about how that's going to work, because we need to get this map right. Two, the home insurance issue is a real deal. It's a real deal everywhere that recurring climate disasters are generating billions and billions of dollars of property damage and insurance payouts. Floodplains, hurricane zones, a long list that's growing longer. The problem here isn't Senate Bill 762. It's the billions of dollars that insurers are paying out because of this growing surge of megafires. I think someone else will be going into some detail about that tonight. Third, and above all, it is my really strong hope that we all keep in mind exactly where we are right now. Our communities, especially in Southern Oregon, are at immediate risk of destruction. We've already seen it in Phoenix and Talent and some upstate towns in 2020, and a growing list of California towns before and since. And meanwhile, temperatures are only getting higher each year. Forests and rangelands are only gotten drier. Wind patterns have only gotten fiercer and more chaotic. Without bold action, the Alameda fire, and probably worse, is Oregon's future. So we could say, yeah, it's bad, but we just don't want to impose any more requirements or costs or new responsibilities on Oregonians who are already under so much pressure. So why don't we cross our fingers and send out more brochures with handy tips of what to do during fire season and hope this goes away. The majority of us in the legislature weren't willing to do that and then just shrug and send our thoughts and prayers to the next communities that burn down this year or next year or the year after. The people we represent deserve better than that. So again, Senate Bill 762 is not perfect. We never dreamed that it would be. It's a work in progress. It's likely to be true in that way for another decade at least. We think it's our job to figure out the very best ways to reduce the risk of these huge fires, protect our communities from destruction, and at the same time, do everything possible to minimize the burden and cost on Oregonians, particularly those living on the edge of their budgets. And there are grant programs in 762 to help do that. The truth is, this is a crisis government cannot solve on its own. Our state is in great peril, and I am praying every day that we can set aside the distrust and anger, at least for now, and give ourselves a chance to come together to protect it. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Senator. Next, I'd like to introduce ODF's Chief of Fire Protection, Chief Mike Shaw.
Thank you, Tim. Good evening, folks. Again, my name is Mike Shaw, and I currently serve as the Chief of Fire Protection for the Oregon Department of Forestry. And thank you, Senator, for those opening comments. Those were great and in line with some of the stuff I have. Sincere thanks to everybody that has taken the time out of their busy schedules this evening to come and engage in this critically important conversation that really seeks to establish a statewide wildfire risk map that is as effective and accurate as possible. I'm asking for your assistance this evening in that effort, as I fully recognize that we have some challenges to address to ensure that this map can be effectively used for its legislative purpose. The map ultimately guides where wildfire risk mitigation measures, defensible space that would be administered by Oregon State Fire Marshal's Office and the hardening of homes by the Building Codes Division, where those may be applied across high and extreme risk classes within the wild and urban interface. Many, if not all of you attending this evening have received a letter from my office that notes your wildfire risk classification and your right to appeal that designation. I'm here tonight to honor that right by ensuring that your voices are heard, that me and my team are informed of your concerns, and that we process the appeals and adjust the map where applicable. ODF has received over 1,500 calls to date, and that's just to our Salem office, not counting our field offices, and I wouldn't hazard a guess to what that number is. And I'm committed to responding to all inquiries as I share your interest as an Oregonian and ODF's fire protection chief to ensure that a quality map is established and the appropriate wildfire risk mitigation measures are applied. Prior to this meeting, we have offered statewide county commissioner and city government briefings to ensure no surprises to elected officials. We have advertised this meeting for an hour, but as you heard earlier, I'm happy to join you for another hour or as necessary if questions continue to come in. We are committed to return in person if desired when the heat subsides and the safety of all can be ensured. We have the appropriate experts in the room tonight from OSU to discuss the development of the map and from ODF on the appeals process. I've also requested that an expert from the insurance market with the state's Division of Financial Regulation be present as I share your interest in a healthy insurance market and to ensure that this map does not negatively affect or impact our insurance rates or ability to acquire insurance. Thank you again, Senator Golden, for the tone that you set and the expectation to serve Oregonians and keep our communities safe by listening and delivering on legislative expectations. Thanks all. Back to you, Tim.
Thank you, Chief Shaw. Next is Tim Hochbach. He'll give a presentation on the rules, notifications, and the appeals process.
Thank you, Tim. And as the presentation is loaded here, my name is Tim Hochbach. I serve as the Deputy Chief of Policy and Planning with the Oregon Department of Forestry. I'll start off the presentation here tonight with providing information on kind of where the map process was developed from, where the what the requirements were out of Senate Bill 762 for the department in the creation of both the wildfire risk map as well as the wildland urban interface identification, how the bill changed what previously was in Oregon law, as well as providing that overview. And then I'm going to transition over to Dr. Chris Dunn for the risk mapping portions, and we're going to close with what's next. So with that, I'm going to share my screen here quickly. Okay. So Senate Bill 762 had two tasks for the Department of Forestry. One was the identification of the wildfire risk map and the identification also of the wildland urban interface. And with that wildfire risk map became very specific criteria. And with that, the map itself sets the stage for next steps in the process, as Senator Golden mentioned in his opening comments. And the bill required the Department of Forestry to oversee the development and the maintenance of a comprehensive statewide map of wildfire risk. And with that as well, Oregon State University is assisting us with that in its development and support of the map, also to include that wildland urban interface geographic area. And it was very specific to be based on criteria involving weather, climate, topography, and vegetation in its development. With that, it also designated the Oregon Wildfire Risk Explorer as the official map to have it publicly accessible for Oregonians. As I mentioned, it sets the stage for next steps of the process and serves a twofold purpose: informing Oregonians of wildfire risk throughout the state, as well as informing next steps in the implementation of Senate Bill 762, not only in where the regulatory focus may apply, but also the focus of investments of other resources and grant programs as well for the other agencies that are participants in the implementation of advancing wildfire protection. The statewide wildfire risk map had, as I mentioned, had four criteria that were required for consideration in its development: weather, climate, topography, and vegetation. Dr. Dunn will be walking through how those criteria were utilized in its creation of the map, and as well for providing some context on criteria that could not be utilized in the development of the map is items such as local fire service response capability, where defensible space has currently been applied, home hardening, small irrigated lawns and their effects on the vegetation and surrounding areas, as well as identification of areas that currently have fire white status. So those criteria, while all important in promoting a safe and having a protected community, they weren't allowed to be part into the criteria or the consideration criteria in the development of the map. The wildland urban interface is the second portion of the what was required of the department in identification of areas. The relationship between the wildland urban interface geographic area and the wildfire risk is that the focus is for areas that are in high and extreme wildfire risk, but also are within the wildland urban interface. And that focused area provides where we can dedicate resources to have our the most effectiveness. Throughout the development of that process, there was a rulemaking around utilization of one structure per 40 acres to calculate that area for finding that area of where finding that transition zone between our urban environment and then where we would have our wildland or urban rural communities and that transition zone in between. So, but to make sure we had a refined and focused geographic area, we also gave considerations for making sure that we were focused around areas where people lived, so homes. So we tried to utilize that structures had to exceed 400 square feet to be even initially considered, that only one structure was considered per tax lot. So that would mean a rural property that had a house, a barn, and a couple outbuildings wouldn't essentially create its own regulatory environment. That would have been excluded. And also that one structure that was counted per tax lot had to be within a certain distance from another tax lot or structure on a separate tax lot. And that distance is 740 feet. So as we work through that, then that creates an area of trying to focus around where we have our population intermixed with vegetation. To get to the point of having the map developed, we had to go through the Department of Forestry undertook a rulemaking process. We assembled a rule advisory committee to assist us with this process and utilized a diverse, wide-ranging background of both affected and interested parties for that process. We met multiple times, or 13 times between August and February, as we walk through the rulemaking process through utilizing public meetings to provide opportunities for the public to provide input on as we were developing the rules. The goal of the group was to utilize the use of scientific quantifiable data in its recommendation and decision making and utilize best modeling methodology in the development of the map. We conducted a public hearing process in April, and the Board of Forestry adopted the final rules that govern the map's development and implementation in June. And then the map was subsequently completed for launch in June of 2022, on June 30th. To have a bit of a summary, that there previously was a defensible space law as a requirement within Oregon. It was passed in the mid-90s. The Senate Bill 762 provides updates and modernization of that law. And for a summary of changes, the previous defensible space requirements were only applied or only allowed to be applied within ODF protection districts. Senate Bill 762 expands that to provide having those the mapping is conducted on a statewide basis, as we've seen with the new Oregon Explorer. Utilizing the electronic portal as a way to communicate with the public, so folks can log in and take a look at their wildfire risk and receive that at their fingertips. There's been a clear designation of 5 risk classes with the Oregon Explorer: no risk, low, moderate, high, and extreme. And it also, through this process with Senate Bill 762, moved the administration of defensible space from what was previously with the Department of Forestry over to the Office of State Fire Marshal. And I'll touch on that towards the end of the presentation. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Chris Dunn to continue with how the map was created, as well as the identification of the wildland urban interface.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. As you can see here on this slide, this was the adopted definition of the wildland urban interface for Oregon. With that, after adoption of this definition, then we went through those criteria, much of which Tim has already discussed. to narrow the scope and the area of the wildland urban interface, which is the focus of SB 762. This really relied on two different components. So next slide, please. And that included the density of structures present in the state of Oregon, meeting that 1 per 40 acre standard. And then as well as its proximity, those structures' proximity to combustible vegetation. So that's that wildland fuels and vegetative fuels. The maps you see here in front of you on the left would be the points of all the structures known in the state of Oregon using a recently developed state data set from Dogami. And then on the right is the burnable landscape from Oregon with a buffer for that interface community. And what we're really trying to do is marry these two maps together to identify that wildland urban interface. And so you have to have that 1 per 40 acre structure density, and then you have to either be embedded in vegetation with 50% cover within the vicinity of the home within that same radius of the 1 per 40 acre. So that's where we make the assessment of the proximity to vegetation. Or you have to be within 1.5 miles of a large vegetative block that is 2 square miles or larger, which forms an interface community, or an occluded community, which is identified as being within 1.5 miles of a vegetative block between 1 and 2 square miles in size. And the map on the right really identifies those areas that are potential for being wildland urban interface as we blend it with that structure density that you see on the left, which gets significantly reduced based on the criteria that Tim mentioned earlier in one of the slides. And so when we look at that, in the next slide, please, in practice, we see on the left, after the inclusion of the urban growth boundary as well, the distribution of structure density that's high enough to meet that standard. And then when we blend it with the vegetative fuels, it results in the map on the right, which is the distribution of the wildland urban interface in Oregon based on this process. What you see primarily reduced when you include the proximity to vegetation or those city cores. And so you can see up there in Portland, Salem, other larger cities, how the real urban environment is excluded in that process. But this formulates the basis of the wildland urban interface across Oregon, which amounts to 4.4% of the state of Oregon's land mass. So very narrow perspective. So go ahead and do the next slide. We were really trying to take through that RAC process a much more what I refer to as a scalpel approach. So we're really narrowing the scope of that wildland urban interface to be very specific. And so you can see here the previous WUI map for the state of Oregon embedded in red, and then in black is what we developed through this process through the public Rules Advisory Committee process and ultimately accepted by the Board of Forestry. And so we really narrowed the scope of this, and we're really driving at that area where structures really reside at the wildland urban interface. And then that formulates the basis of where we're gonna make an assessment of wildfire risk for the state of Oregon. So go ahead and next slide, please. And so the next tier to this is to figure out the distribution of those 5 classes of wildfire risk across the state of Oregon. The map you see here is just the same burnable landscape that you saw before when we were looking at the distribution of where the wildland urban interface may be. It's just categorized into sort of broad life form. It's just to show the basis of where we're going to simulate wildfire risk on. So go ahead and next slide. There's really 3 components to assessing wildfire risk, particularly to structures. One is burn probability, and that's the most basic and foundational assessment of wildfire risk in any sense. So just what is the likelihood that a fire is going to occur? And then we have to address what is the intensity of that fire should it occur, and as well as the susceptibility of the value, in this case, the structure, to that type of fire occurrence. And so the map on the left is the burn probability map developed across the state of Oregon. It relies on a subset of climatic regions across the state of Oregon within the large fire simulator model. And so you can see, Northwest Oregon being its own subsetted ecoregion. We call them pyromes. So these are really climatic regions where we assess the historical fire occurrence and fire distribution and fire size all across the state of Oregon. And there's over 10 within the state of Oregon. And so you might have one across the Northwest Oregon, the Willamette Valley, the Northern Cascades, the Southwestern Oregon region, which is the region of most interest today, the Eastern Cascades, and then pushing out into the Great Basin and over the Blue Mountains towards Northeastern Oregon. And all of those will be modeled separately based on their own individual fire histories, fire size occurrences, and then the vegetation, fuels, and topography that are all present within that. And that's all based on these long used fire behavior models developed out of the Wildland Fire Lab for the United States. On the right is the fire intensity map that was developed using a slightly different tool that is more refined and finer scale. So it's really based on 4-kilometer grids all across the state of Oregon, where we're really using downscaled weather information and as well as topographic information, wind diversification that results from the topography, so that we can get a finer scale estimate of the fire intensity that occurs. Now, within this model also is ember casts. And so most home ignitions are the result of ember showers coming from distances sometimes far away from the home itself. And so those are also embedded within the modeling framework, so that we're capturing both that flaming front as well as the ember showers that typically ignite homes prior to the flaming front arrival. Now, as I noted, we have to translate this into the susceptibility, and we do that through what we call response functions. So next slide, please. And on the left, you'll see the distribution of response functions as associated with those fire intensity levels as categorized in the map on the right. And so what you see is that we moderate the impacts of fire based on the actual fire intensity. And so when it's low fire intensity, 0 to 2 feet, we model in a grass life form. So in those field models that are estimated to be grass versus shrubs or timber, we see 10 to 20% expected loss associated with the fire intrusion at that level and that type of fuel. And then it increases as the fire intensity increases over time. This allows us to translate fire intensity into something that we can merge with that burn probability. And we ultimately multiply that response function value from all across the state by the burn probability to estimate the expected losses over the long run. And that becomes the wildfire risk values that we use to categorize wildfire risk all across the state. We developed an objective process for setting those thresholds by using percentile ranks based on information that we gained from the Rules Advisory Committee. And they were really targeting the use of about 25% of the area in the wildland urban interface was the expectation of what would be at high or extreme risk. We slightly modified that and pulled it down to about 23%, looking at about 10% of our structures that exist within the wildland urban interface as being at high or extreme risk. And those established an objective threshold that we then categorized the larger map within the wildland urban interface. Next slide, please. And that's the map that you can see here. This is the distribution of wildfire risk across the state of Oregon using that process within the wildland urban interface as assessed using the rules developed by the Rules Advisory Committee. We can see, of course, the hotspot consistent with all of the fire history and the losses that we've observed down in the Southwest Oregon ecoregion being of the highest or most extreme wildfire risk. You see a hotspot in the Bend, Oregon area. And then, of course, up by the Dalles and Hood River is another hotspot. And then the wildland urban interface is much smaller as we move across the Eastern Oregon. Because we narrowed it down so significantly. And so then you can see some hotspots here and there farther east across Oregon. So next slide, please. When we think about by the numbers, if we were to have homes built every location all across the state of Oregon, we would expect 57% of those to be in high risk. Now that includes all of those federal lands, the Kalmiopsis wilderness, all these really significant and flammable landscapes. Of course, we don't build in those, and we don't build in those not just because of the ownership, but because in part the wildfire risk that's present, the challenging topography and conditions that are present out there. And so we actually typically live in a much safer location than the state risk levels that occur. And so when we just look at the wildland urban interface, we're only talking about 23% of the area being in higher extreme risk. So that a little bit less than that upper quarter, amounting to only 4.4% of the state of Oregon. It's approximately 123,000 tax lots, which is 8.8% of Oregon's tax lots, but not all of those currently have buildings on them. Many of them are pasture lands or otherwise, and it results in about 80,000 tax lots currently having structures on them that reside in that high or extreme risk. Next slide, please. So, just as a note, we've had one large fire recently here in Oregon. It was the Willow Creek fire from out very far out east, just outside the town of Willow Creek, north of Vail and Ontario area. And you can see on the left our estimate of wildfire risk, and then you can see the fire occurrence on the right, the actual fire boundary that occurred. And you can see that in this case we certainly hit the nail on the head, if you will, that this fire occurred where we expected to be high risk. Fortunately, there were no structures present on that landscape. As I noted before, this is really looking at the landscape as if it had structures everywhere, and it doesn't. And you can also see the effect of all the irrigated lands and pivot wheels and how we've accounted for those and reduced their wildfire risk since they are irrigated. And you can see this long irrigated valley and how that's captured within the model and accounted for. Now, it's not no risk because ember showers do cast in there. Of course, they won't light a pasture on fire, but again, we're looking at the landscape through the lens as if it had structures everywhere, because that was what was mandated in this case through SB 762. And so we're certainly capturing some of the trends that are observable across the state of Oregon. And so we can go to the next slide. There are some key resources that are available to gather more information. We'll put some in the chat, hopefully, or share those with you at another time, or you can reach out and, of course, request them. But one is the Oregon Wildfire Risk Explorer, which many of you have probably checked already, and the homeowners reports that come from that. We have information at this OSU Wildfire Risk Map website on the College of Forestry, and technical guides and other things available for use as you see fit. And you can certainly reach out and request those. So next slide, and we'll turn it back over to Tim to conclude our presentation.
Thank you, Chris. So I want to, as we move towards the end of just before we hop into questions, wanted to have a what's next. So most folks are here tonight because they received a notification letter from the Department of Forestry. And there was 2 notification letters that went out. One of them was designated if you're in higher extreme risk and not in the wildland urban interface. That was one of the letters. The other was if you were in the wildland urban interface. And as we mentioned, it was the crossover of both the higher extreme and being within the wildland urban interface areas where you may require actions. And again, that's if a structure is present there. So at this time, if you're in higher extreme risk and you're not in the WUI, no actions required of you. It was, as I mentioned, it's a letter to inform you of your wildfire risk designation. And it was part of one of the aspects with the bill of informing Oregonians of what that wildfire risk is where they live. If you are within the wildland urban interface, action may be required if you have a structure present. And for that process, there's the Defensible Space Code. Currently is being developed by the Office of the State Fire Marshal. That code is not in effect and won't be until January of 2023. And so with that, they're still under the code development process. Throughout that, there's information in the Oregon Explorer and links as well to provide some find more information about that process. It's the schedule, how to attend public meetings, where public input opportunities are, and once the code is instituted, it's going to have an educational focus for that. for its implementation. The building code requirements are in the same space. They're currently working through that rulemaking process for the development of updated building codes. That process will be has its own schedule. It's also notated in the Oregon Explorer, and that process won't be in effect with new building code requirements in effect until April of 2023. There was information in the letter regarding the appeals process as well. For folks, if you're looking at your designation of wildfire risk and think it should be it's not correct, it can either be appealed upwards or downwards to a higher or a lower risk class. That information, that link and information is available for the department's website for that, and that webpage will be shared as well. So with that, wanted to turn it over to leave opportunity for as many questions as possible tonight. So I'm going to.
And just a reminder, I'll be caught on the person, and then you have to hit unmute. Then we ask that you also lower your hand because we have a lot of questions stacked up. So our first person is Sharon. Go ahead, Sharon. Okay, Sharon doesn't seem to be there. Our next person who had a question is Addison Johnson. Addison?
Folks who are, when you get the cue to ask to unmute, be sure you click that unmute button so we can hear you.
One more time for Addison. The next one is Tony. Tony, if you're there. I think we have a technical issue, so if you would stand by a minute, we're going to try to fix the unmute button.
Tony, if you're able to hear us, go ahead and unmute, and we'd love to take your question.
This is Tony. I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I was just filling out the form. I didn't really have any specific question. I wanted to hear everybody else's questions. So I'm basically just a listener right now.
Okay, Tony, thank you for listening. We'll go on to Sharon as our next questioner.
Sharon, you should have just gotten a cue to unmute yourself and ask us your question.
A response from Sharon? How about M. Darlene Gill?
Darlene, go ahead and click that the unmute button, and love to hear your question.
Okay, let's try to move on to Sherry Roberts. Sherry, you should see the unmute button.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, my question is that after looking at this map, you guys have blanketed lots of areas as the same designation, high, low, whatever. And nobody ever came out to our house to look at our property or anything to designate us high, low, or extreme or whatever. And I was kind of wanting to know why that is. Is this going to be rectified? Is somebody going to come out and check our property out to actually see what our property is valued, not valued, but, you know, classified as, or what?
Thank you for that question, Sherry. So the criteria that we were directed to utilize in the creation of the map between weather, climate, topography, and vegetation. Those three of those are largely found without doing the site visit with it. I'm going to let Dr. Chris Dunn talk through where the vegetation modeling comes from and the scale that it's pulled at.
Yeah, hi, Sherry. Thanks. Yeah, so there's what we call fuel models, which we translate the vegetation type as best we can assess using satellite imagery. And this is a process that's been going on for several decades now as they continue to refine those estimates. And that's an assessment of what the vegetation is, and then we translate that into a fuel model. That fuel model is then gone through a vetting process with our fire behavior specialists around the region. They have experience modeling wildfires in real time and understand how those fuel models translate to real observed fire conditions. And so then we make those modifications as their experience suggests is necessary. And so all of that is done in both two parts. One, large remote sensing, so satellite imagery, and then a long history of both scientific experts and practitioners that are in real time doing that. Now, to the point of looking at your property, I think that will happen with the state fire marshal when they make their educational and site visits to look at whether or not you currently have defensible space or need some adjustments.
So
Okay,
when is
thank
that
you.
going to? So when is that going to happen? Do you know, or?
There's no date and time for that. These processes as well with the, as Senator Golden mentioned, we'll be walking through the maintenance cycles for the map. And as we walk through these, where we receive information both from the public and from local governments, that does feed into taking a look to make sure that the assignments themselves are dialed in on where they're meant to be, or on where they're supposed to be, in line with both the law and the rules that govern the map. So with this, as Chris mentioned, most of the site visits will be with the defensible space implementation, and that's going to be starting after the code's developed in January, with that educational focus.
So with us where we are located at on Highway 62, and we lived through the open chain fire, did that have anything to do with this classification?
That intensity and occurrence would have a impact on the designation and be included in that fire history that Dr. Dunn mentioned. I'm gonna let Chris elaborate more so.
Yeah. Sherry, yes, it really does. That South Open Chain fire, I think the majority of that footprint has been classified as moderate, and that is the case as of today. we recognize that the risk was there prior and that the risk will develop again in the future. But at this point,
if it was moderate, then why are we in a high classification?
I would have to look at your actual property address to take a look at that.
Okay, well, we are in a high in the wildlife, the urban, whatever you call it.
No, the wildland urban interface, yes.
Yeah, we're high, classified as high.
Okay.
So,
and your entire property burned in that?
no, we didn't.
that's
We
what she
didn't
said.
burn.
Oh, you didn't burn?
No. We said, you know, we had to evacuate,
Okay.
but our property wasn't touched. We have a farm and we have animals that graze on our farm to keep our wildlife, our vegetation down. And we have a pond that we irrigate with. We get irrigation water that runs through our property. So, you know, we're classified as high. We have a swimming pool.
Sherry, I'm sorry, we have 1,200 people on board, so we're going to move on to the next question. Chris or Tim will be glad to follow up on questions you have. Our next question comes from COTPD. Go ahead and press unmute.
Can you hear me? I already unpressed it.
We can hear you.
Okay. I have a couple questions, but I'll try and keep it short because I know a lot of people have questions like I do. First off, I'd just like to respectfully make a comment to Senator Golden. He's saying that he wants to help Oregonians, that he wants us to understand the risk of fire in our area. I think the Alameda fire definitely showed everyone what the risk was in our area. And he's talking about, you know, all these improvements. Well, the improvements are going to affect the tax-paying citizens. If we're talking, you know, arrangements, things like, you know, a certain type of roofing, a certain type of siding. There are a lot of people in the area that I live in that are senior citizens that are on a very limited income. So I don't know, you know, how much. It just seems like it's kind of a way just to kind of. He also mentioned the fact that the insurance companies, you know, lost a lot of money during the Alameda fires. I understand that, but being an insurance company, you kind of take those risks involved. The other thing is I'm kind of confused. It's almost like they're putting the cart before the horse. Just within the last week, this is the first I even heard of this Senate bill. And I like to think of myself as a very well-educated voter and citizen. I don't think I'm alone in that frustration. Also, the fact that we're talking about defensible space codes, those haven't even been set yet. So I think it seems to me that you guys are kind of confused. That's kind of the take I'm getting on it, that you're confused why people are so upset over this. Well, it's upsetting because you get a letter in the mail saying that you're in a high risk category and there's a possibility that your insurance company is not going to cover your homeowner's insurance anymore. If you can't get insurance, you're not going to be able to get a mortgage from a bank. So you kind of dangle this carrot in front of people. And then when questions come about as far as, you know, well, we're going to make these defensible space codes and housing codes and building codes and all these things. And then people have questions about it, you know, well, how is this going to affect me? There's no specific answers. And my last point is the fact that you're discussing the fact that our area is drier. That I understand. But the problem is that when you cite the fact that the area is drier, I would just like to point out that the Garner Complex fire in 2018, yes, it was in fact caused by lightning, but I think a lot of the issues with that fire had to do with poor forest management, which has been going on for years. And I'm not trying to point fingers at any one particular agency, but it just seems like that constant poor forest management is now falling back to us, the homeowners. And, you know, the recent fires in Medford that we've had, those are all arson. And then when the doctor points out the maps of how you guys have tried to lay out the maps in the state of Oregon, and the northern areas are considered less riskful. I remember the Hood River fire. that was once again caused by arson. But according to that map that I see, that Hood River area is considered a low risk area. The Salem fire in 2018, same issue. That Salem area is considered a low risk, but we had the fire in 2018 in the Salem area. So a lot of I don't know what kind of science you use, and I'm not trying to ditch the doctor. I'm sure there's some sort of science that went into it. But as a layperson, it doesn't make sense to me that those areas of Portland and Salem that had those major fires in 2018 are at a low risk, and those of us down here are a high risk. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Thank you. So for those who are in the queue and have your hand raised, so when you get, it's listed in the order that you raised your hand in. When you get near the top of the list, I'm going to send you a cue that says ask to unmute, that says the host would like you to unmute. If you could go ahead and tap that button when you see it, that'll help us move through these questions quicker. So really appreciate everyone's patience, and thank you.
Our next question is from Mark Embersold. Go ahead, Mark.
Tim, this is Jeff Golden. May I make just one very quick comment? I don't want to respond to all the folks commenting, but just as a point of fact, in the last speaker, I wanted there to be clarity that there's nothing in Senate Bill 762 that requires hardening or new materials on existing homes. So I think there might have been a little confusion about that. That's not part of this program.
I'll defer. I got shut down. Go for it.
That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, for that comment. Mark, are you still on? Do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm here. My question was about house hardening. What did that mean if we were in the zone? House hardening. What did that mean?
So for that particular process in general, it means utilizing fire resistant building materials in the construction of new homes. That's pretty obvious. But someone who buys a house from the 50s, 60s who has wooden siding, what does that mean to us? For many of the aspects, it applies to new construction. For that, so it's as communities build out into that interface, the new houses would follow that code.
Got it. Okay, got it. So I'm not going to have to go get fiberboard and plaster that on my old house.
No.
Thank you. That's very helpful. But what about fire resistant? My secondary question about fire resistant roofing, and I will let it go. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Next up is Brian. Go ahead, Brian. Hit the unmute. Okay, if Brian's not there, we're queue up Brandon Larson.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yep.
All right, so a couple of comments first and then a question. First of all, I wanted to address what Senator Jeff Golden said. I feel like you are being a little bit disingenuous when you say that there's not going to be a cost to homeowners, because as I understand it, if I wanted to apply to either add an addition to my home or change anything to the existing dwelling, that I would be subject to these new building codes that have yet to be decided. The other thing is that you said that this is due to a climate emergency. I feel like that's a little bit inaccurate as well, because we're basing this on the fires that happened in 2020. And if we're talking about the actual dwellings that were lost at that time, we're talking about 0.002% of the dwellings in the state. And to impose these kind of restrictions on the people that live in your district is unfair. The other part that you spoke of was the social media disinformation. in that the information that's out there is incorrect. That's not true either, because I'm sitting in a place here right now where I'm overlooking a huge area of several hundred acres that are irrigated. They're green year round, and yet they are in high or extreme risk category. They're never going to burn. It's never going to happen. The other thing that you said also was that this was designed to impose no costs on existing home or landowners. That's also not true, because I've spoken with my insurance provider and they have said that they're currently assessing this bill, and that they are most likely not going to extend any new policies to people in the area, and that future rates are also going to be increased and may actually be canceled. So that's not something that's no cost to me or the people that live around me. But my question is to Jeff Golden is, when you're speaking with your constituents, what are you going to do to help them when it seems to me and many others that I've spoken to that this is more about climate change evangelism than it is about actually protecting people from the risks that are out there and have been here always, because we live in a state that is mostly timberland and will burn at some point. We're not dealing with something that's out of the ordinary. We've always had dry years. It's not anything new.
Yeah, this is Jeff Golden, and I just kind of want to defer to the moderator and the host, because you've opened a very big conversation. There are a whole lot of people who want to get in. If I can get your contact information, I'd be glad to talk out offline. I can go into a couple things you've said, but this is a much larger conversation. I will say that there was a little communications broke down, because I did not say we're saying this won't impose any costs on people with existing homes. What I said was we can't say that things are too dire. About the causes of all this, and you and I could go back and forth for quite a while, and my sense is this isn't the best use of this time with so many people on the line, but I would be happy to talk to you afterwards if you give me a way to do that.
Thank you, Senator. That's correct. If you keep your questions more to the risk map itself, we understand there's lots of concern about the impact on you, but our experts here tonight can't really address those more political legislative questions. So if you would, in the follow-up questions that we have next, if you would try to keep it a little more to the map part and the appeal process, I think that'd be beneficial to more people. So next on the list is Molly. Molly, do you have a question? Molly Rowell, question? Click your unmute if you're there. Okay, no Molly. How about Victoria? Victoria Marshall.
Yes, thank you. I would like to really thank the other citizens who are speaking out, the initial CEO, and I didn't get the other ones, and Sherry, and the last person, who are addressing very important information that we have received about the risk management map. And they're pointing out very important things. I would like to reiterate that the Alameda fire was arson. The risk mitigation for arson is to catch the arsonists, but there is nothing in this map that is addressing that. And also someone previously said that poor forest management is also a cause of these fires. And we know this to be true. And that has not been incorporated into the science of the map. So arson and poor forest management, which are the two largest causes of fires in Oregon recently, especially in Southern Oregon, are not, and we're the people who are going to face the brunt of this. So the two main features who are risks aren't in your models. So your models are already flawed. So flawed models are going to create flawed outcomes, and these are people's lives. And I'd also like to address something. Golden said, "You're not my representative. You actually don't represent most of Southern Oregon." But I still would like to address what you said about thoughts and prayers. That was extremely dismissive, and I'm just assuming that it was directed towards Christians. So I just wanted to point that out. And that goes to the last speaker, or one of the last speaker, who said this is climate evangelism. So if you aren't addressing the actual cause of the fire in your models, you are just adding in your belief about what is causing the fire, not the actual causes. And I really appreciated, I think it was Sherry, who said, "Well, have you come out to look at the land? You know, I've got irrigated pasture." That is my situation as well. And I'm finding myself, I found out just a couple of hours ago, in an extreme area. This is going to hurt me. It's going to hurt my property. It's going to hurt my family. And once again, your models are flawed. So obviously they are flawed. And maybe it had to do with, and this was a quote from the bill, as if it had structures everywhere. And that was something that you had to put in because it was required by the bill. Well, as that's arbitrary, that's imaginary, that's not actually what's happening on the ground. So most of the Southwest fires have been caused by arson. And also the drier conditions in Southern Oregon are also being exacerbated by the growth of marijuana, which is lowering the water tables. I didn't hear any of you speak about that. So,
excuse me, Victoria, could we give our panelists a minute to answer one or two of your questions?
Well, I guess it was more of a comment. I've written notes about what you're saying our experts have been saying, and I'm addressing what they are saying. Mostly, I just want to thank the citizens, because this is something that's going to detrimentally affect people, and you haven't done your due diligence in boots on the ground and actually considering the actual causes of the fires. And so I respectfully ask that you go back to the drawing board and fix what you have done. And I thank you for your time.
Okay, I don't think there is a direct question there, so we're going next to M. Darlene Gill. If you're on, please unmute yourself and ask the question. Darlene, are you there? Okay, we'll move on to the next question from Oshana. Oshana, if you're there, please press unmute and ask your question. No, Oshana? Amy. Amy is next. Amy, if you have a question, please press unmute and ask it.
Great. Thank you so much. I just want to thank all the panelists first for all the helpful information, and then for all of your efforts in this process. I've got a twofold question relating to homeowners insurance. I'm wondering if the bill, SB 762, as enacted, contains language, or will language be included in the adopted regs that place, I guess, a moratorium, for lack of a better word, on insurers from adjusting our premiums or dropping us, given that the fire risk map is now out, and these new high and extreme classifications are out and in the public? And then secondly, can somebody speak to whether or not some language is going to be included that prohibits insurers from dramatically increasing our premiums or dropping us if we comply with the home hardening and defensible space requirements once they're adopted? Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Amy. So currently in the bill, there is no language for that. However, we have Brian Fordham from the Department of Financial Regulation who can assist with some of those insurance questions and provide some context and resources. So Brian, if you wouldn't mind popping off of mute here and fielding that one for us. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Tim. Again, my name is Brian Fordham, and I'm from the Division of Financial Regulation. You're correct in that Senate Bill 762 does not contain those provisions. I think that the next question that you asked, Amy, was whether or not there would be a provision that would limit premium increases. The 762 does not address that either. Although I can tell you that in the wildfire map as it's currently been produced, when an insurer submits a rate increase or any rate change to our office, my actuarial team reviews that rate change for actuarial sufficiency. And as part of that rate change review, we look for actuarial justification. And I can tell you currently, we have not had any rate changes that have been submitted that have used this map as part of the analysis, as part of the submitted documentation for any background analysis that any insurer has used for justification of any rate change to date. So
I mean, can I just,
certainly,
for quick clarification, that makes sense just given the fact that the map was just released to the public in the last several days. So it would make sense that rate changes or proposed rate changes probably haven't made it to your desk that take that into account.
Right.
And if as you confirm that language prohibiting such dramatic rate changes and or dropping policyholders was not contained in the legislation, since the regulations are currently underway and being considered, can we get some assurances that some language will be included in those final adopted regs that prohibit dramatic rate increases or dropping homeowners altogether if in fact as homeowners we go through the cost, expense, and time to do what we need to do to our properties to make them hardened and or to create that defensible space that you're asking of us?
Well, and so that's part of the legislation is currently written. It's not, let me restate that. The legislation is currently written does not address that. And so to make those changes, it would require a legislative fix.
I see. Okay.
Right.
Could the senator maybe jump in and express whether or not he'd have an interest in pursuing cleanup or follow-up legislation that addresses just that issue?
I will say that there's going to be revisions to 762 probably in every session going forward. That's part of the course correction and learning as we go. I would say the whole area of requiring insurance companies to do things is a very steep lift politically, but it's certainly worth the conversation. Again, if you'd like to contact me afterwards with specific ideas, I'd be very happy to talk to you.
Great. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Amy. We're going to our next question from Judy and Craig. Go ahead and press us on mute.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. This is Craig Hinkle and O'Brien. And I was just wondering, isn't the BLM and ODF responsible for the forest management? And wouldn't they be responsible for creating a defensible space in the inter area where the forest meets the urban areas? And that's basically all I have to say. Can you answer those questions, please?
Yep. Thank you for those questions. So there is the ownership of state forest lands is rather small in this state of Oregon. However, the BLM down in the Southern Oregon area do have a considerable land ownership as a federal land manager for that. Throughout this map development process, a lot of those areas have been designated as higher extreme risk, as is pretty common throughout the Southern Oregon area there. What it did is, with that information provided, it does provide a target for other investments that were portions of Senate Bill 762. So there was $20 million focused towards work on those federal lands in areas of high and extreme risk that were in proximity or within the wildland urban interface. So with that, as I mentioned, this map is intended to inform other policy decisions and those investments. So yes, there are funds designated for these areas for those treatments, and the work is currently underway.
Thank you, Craig.
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead, Judy.
Yeah, this is Judy Hinkle. If it is your responsibility to do the interface between the forest and our lands, and nothing has changed from last year, why are we now getting changes to our policy of doing our own defensible space that we have been doing every year and keeping our area defensible so that it isn't prone to fire? So we're doing that continually, and then it seems as though you're not doing your job to come up to our land, because we're continuing to do our land. Yep. So where are the changes what are you going to be doing? You said there's $20 million. I'm just wondering how you're going to be using that in Southern Oregon with the county offices and Josephine County. Could you answer that question?
Yes, and first off, I'd like to say thank you for completing the defensible space work on your property. Not only does it provide a place for protect your property, but it also makes that so that firefighters have an opportunity to defend your property as well from wildfire. So for that work, thank you. We initiated the development of the wildfire risk map back in June. Along with that investment of focusing on areas where this high and extreme fire risk does occur in areas amidst and among our population centers. That was also initiated in July. So many of these projects, I don't have the exact project sites. However, I do know that much of the focus was scattered in the same areas around our population centers in not only Josephine County, but also Jackson County, Deschutes County as well, where we have that identified areas of our population centers intermixed with the vegetation aspects that have been designated as higher extreme risk. So that work was initiated, and the first projects were awarded in January. And due to us having a little bit of an extended calmer spring, we've gotten much of that work done in some of those treatment areas around the various areas of the state.
Thank you for that. Our next question, S. Lopez. Go ahead, S. Lopez. I think also, Mike Shaw, did you have a follow-up to that last question?
Yeah, I just wanted to provide a little bit of context on the $20 million in landscape resiliency funds. I want to provide just maybe a little bit of context on that funding. That sort of work is really expensive work, and that $20 million is going to cover about 160,000 acres across the state of Oregon, spread out in high and extreme risk in some identified projects that were ranked and prioritized above other projects that were submitted at the same time. And there was not enough funding clearly to go around to do all of the work that needs to be done in Oregon in this manner. And so maybe a couple of finer points on the responsibility. You asked, what is ODF going to do on our responsibility? And ODF doesn't actually own the land. Private landowners own the land, and you folks have thankfully done the defensible space as you articulated to us, and that's where the value is to firefighters and to Oregonians as we try to reduce the catastrophic loss of homes as a wildfire comes through these areas. We do know over time that wildfires will come into our communities, and the more resilient landscapes we have and resilient communities we have, the better off we are to provide successful suppression activity to save your homes and your properties. And so ODF is not actually doing defensible space because we don't have actual ownership or property that would require that. The requirement for defensible space resides on landowners. And to your point, folks, you have been doing it for years, and many folks have. And so the downstream regulations may not apply to you because you've already done that work. And so we want to be clear with that. When the Office of the State Fire Marshal comes in and looks at your property, there may be nothing that needs to be done on the defensible space side of the equation. So just wanted to add a little bit of clarity. Back to you, Tim.
Great. Thanks for that clarification. Firebrand Resiliency Collective, go ahead with your question.
Hi there, my name is Tucker, and I run a wildfire recovery nonprofit, and I deal every day in the devastating effects a lack of preparedness can have. And I'm also a second generation forest landowner here in the Rogue Valley. So I've taken advantage of every grant ODF, FEMA, and NRCS has offered for fuel reduction and creation of defensible space. And every one of my acres has been treated or slated for treatment at least once, sometimes twice. A decade ago, I formed a Firewise community with my neighbors. And I got 3 letters last week, all identifying my property as an extreme risk, and I understand why, though my house is not in the WUI. We're at ground zero here in Southern Oregon, and I also understand how overwhelming this can feel to property owners with so much left undecided in this legislation. So I guess I have 2 questions. One, I'd like to understand how this map will overlay with the building codes and defensible space guidelines, and how the map will be updated in the future. And I think you may have answered a little bit of that in the last comment. But I'd also like to understand why the exclusions from the map that will inform the legislative regulations, including existing Firewise communities, defensible space creation, and current and historic mitigation work, which many of which are funded with public dollars, aren't being taken into account. And just a little bit understand how might this type of information, which is easily included in the GIS interface, play a role in how the course correction Senator Golden mentioned earlier might unfold, and how compliance with these new requirements might be taken into account.
Thank you for that question, Tucker. I wrote it down here, so hopefully I captured all of it. So the map itself is used to provide those focus areas for the building code enforcement or building code identification areas, as well as implementation for defensible space. So both the Department of the Building Code Division and the Office of the State Fire Marshal will be utilizing the same map for their focus areas and working with their implementation partners. The map is updated. It's based on the qualitative wildfire risk assessment, which is updated on about a 5-year update cycle for that modeling. The models for that initially were updated for this spring with 2022. So we have that has been updated, and you can see those updates in the map itself. You can see the large fire footprints from both the 2020 wildfires as well as the bootleg fire from 2021. So when the map next update for the map exists, we'll also be providing a review of how the map has changed, as well as working through a public process before it's implemented to let the public know what those changes are, where they are, why they occurred, and before there's a next round of the notification letters that go out. So get in front of this process and to get folks' input into it. So that is written into the adopted rules by the Board of Forestry of how that process lays out. So as far as the mitigation measures, so those 4 criteria our criteria were specific in the bill to try to capture that, some of the context of the natural landscape. And the one that stands out as being able to be manipulated, as you mentioned, is the vegetation aspect of it. But with the vegetation, as Chris showed, there's predominant overstory or canopy levels, predominant vegetation classes within the state, and that does feed into the map. And at times that predominant vegetation, tree cover, stands of Douglas fir, that does have an effect that as you go through the creating fuel breaks, creating defensible space, doing the understory thinning and removing branches, brush, that kind of stuff, where that work is great for lowering the providing that defensible space and an opportunity for firefighters, but it may not necessarily have an effect on that entire large scale vegetation overstory impact. So, if you look at it from what a landowner can do for defensible space and how that shows on the map versus where we see the impacts from the large fire footprints of where those have lowered the wildfire risk in those areas and have kind of taken little cookie cutter cutouts. But even that is only anticipated to stay as a lowered risk for 2 to 3 years until that vegetation comes back. So the maintenance for it isn't in those areas to have that lasting effect on the vegetation portion of the risk assessment.
Thank you. That's helpful. I would just echo some of the other commenters that some ground truthing for some of this stuff once those legislative regs come into effect and people are asked to sort of meet this new legislation with some investment of time and potentially money is clarified moving forward.
Oh, thank you for that. And we are utilizing, we're encouraging folks, if they don't think their wildfire risk assignment is correct, to please appeal as noted in the letter. There's a simple form that we've developed to capture that the information we needed to essentially get in touch with you to walk through the appeals process, make sure we have the information needed as we review them. But they're serving a twofold process. They're initially the due process for reviewing of the individual properties, as well as they're feeding into where there's areas where we have congregated appeals as well, as Senator Golden and Chief Shaw mentioned, of looking through for making the maintenance cycle and targeting those areas where we do need to take a closer look to ensure that our accuracy is as close as it can be. So thank you for that question.
Okay, our next question is from Jamie. Go ahead, Jamie.
I've got a couple of comments and then a couple of questions, but there's a lot of expert panelists and whatnot. These regulations that were created in this bill aren't representative of the citizens in our community. You guys have made regulations where you can only burn on certain days and certain times, and the moon has to be just right for the smoke to leave the valley, and to maintain our property optimally. You can't burn only on a Monday while we're at work. Taxpayers have to work to pay taxes, and creating these bills behind locked doors in Salem while there's supposedly a pandemic without a vote of the citizens that you're affecting is a complete fraud. Unmistakably a fraud. And I'm having a hard time getting out all of what I have to say because I'm kind of angry about this whole situation. I've worked for everything that we have here very hard, and this is our livelihood, our retirement in some people's cases. You're affecting our insurances and could affect our mortgages. This needs a whole lot more consideration than somebody that obviously doesn't represent the majority of the constituency. To Jeff Golden, there really needs to be a lot of review to the regulations in this bill. Pointedly, the insurance aspect. There needs to be some guidelines on what the insurances can do to our properties. And I'm going to be organizing a lot of people from the community to help with this review process, and I hope to get involved and get other people involved that's concerned with this. Thank you.
Okay, for our next question, S. Lopez. S. Lopez, go ahead with your question. Okay, maybe we'll come back to you, S. Lopez. Michelle, if you would try to hit your unmute, go ahead with your question, Michelle.
Yeah, this is David and Michelle. I guess my question is that we're in a extreme risk area. We're surrounded by extreme risk area, probably a few miles around us. We've spent a number of years trying to mitigate fire risks on this property. And I guess the question is if we were living in the middle of a moat, which you could not burn across, would we be less than extreme in the middle of all this extreme sea of fire risk?
That's a great question, and there is potential that it would have an effect. We as we go through the lakes are in the areas are designated on the map as non-burnable, obviously because they're water. But that proximity, and as Dr. Dunn mentioned, the where we find most of our home losses, or where we do have structural loss, it's from that ember cast from there. So that proximity and some distance from a source of those embers would have an effect on your risk. I also do want to thank you for completing your going through that defensible space work and maintaining that. That again, can't overemphasize how much it provides for firefighters and their safety in defending homes and from wildfire. So thank you for that.
So let me just restate this here, regurgitate what I just heard from you. Is that it really doesn't matter what we do. We will always be categorized as extreme risk because of what goes on around us. And there's nothing that the individual homeowner is going to be able to do to lower that category that will allow him to maintain affordable insurance on his property. Is that correct?
In regards to the wildfire risk designation, that category for the vegetation is the one that homeowners can manipulate to an extent. But there is that category as well as combined with weather is where it has that connection with, the properties aren't individual on the landscape. They are in a geographic area, and that geographic area does have an effect on each other within there. So it is that group effort for that. When we see those vegetation manipulations on a larger scale, as mentioned with some of the larger fire footprints, that's where we see the effects in the risk class being lowered due to the reduced fuel loading. As far as its connection with your insurance policies, that as we mentioned with Brian there, that's something that's being monitored extremely closely right now.
Okay, so what you're suggesting for me to do is gather or get together with my neighbors and then cut a fire break around our properties?
I'm not suggesting that. Many folks live in wooded areas because we enjoy being in wooded areas and the forest we live in, but sort of that. So as I mentioned, this is the tool itself. The map is to inform folks of that potential risk and also to identify those areas for those investments that are part of the bill itself and the 11 other state agencies that have work to do and provide focused investments for them in the future as well. So it's the first step in that informative process.
Okay, so thank you for answering.
I'm sorry, sir.
Questions.
We have a lot of other questions stacked up. Tim will be glad to answer more of your questions later, but if we could move on to Denise. Denise, do you have a question?
I do. So my question is, will there be any resources to help us assist landowners with clearing their properties And for example, I live where I border BLM, and BLM has not come out here and done anything, which makes us at a higher risk. So is there going to be anything where if the landowner is being held responsible, is BLM going to be held responsible to do some clearing to help make that defensible space?
So there are resources that are along or that have been designated along with the implementation of the Defensible Space Code to assist landowners. So there is financial resources to assist landowners who need those to for the creation of defensible space. And that program will be announced as the codes develop with the Fire Marshal's office. So that process is outlined. As far as with the BLM as a property owner or a neighbor to many of us, that their focus again is also around communities, homes, and structures to protect life safety. That is one of their responsibilities as a land manager. To be a good neighbor in that aspect. So those areas that are highlighted as high and extreme not only provide a designated focus for the state resources that were within the bill, but also for a designated focus area for the BLM as well for their local planning to make sure that they have fuel breaks in place to protect communities as well.
Okay, I think one of the issues is that BLM really hasn't done anything. And then if we were to go and make that space defensible, we would get fined because we did something on BLM's property. But it affects us.
Yeah, Denise, let me follow up a little bit. This bill does not give the state of Oregon the ability to stipulate what occurs on federal ownership. And I would encourage reaching out to your local BLM office and seeing if they have any plans in place to provide some sort of fuels mitigation projects along those community lines. Many federal entities do that, whether it's the National Forest or the BLM, but they, like others, have limited budgets and have to prioritize where they spend those funds and have limitations within their federal policies as well. And so unfortunately, for you and for us, we can't stipulate or dictate that those folks go do something. And it does add risk to your risk classification, i.e. you have an increased risk because of your proximity to those lands.
Yeah, that's what's actually driving us up.
Yep, and I fully understand that. And unfortunately, we do not have the ability to manipulate that or change those fuels on those federal ownerships. So apologies on that answer, as it's probably not a palatable answer.
No, it is very helpful. At least you guys are going to get or somebody is going to get resources out there for people to get the assistance. Because like somebody else said, the burn days are on days that people are working, and it is very hard to make a defensible space, especially for the elderly people, if it's very few and far between, which I understand both sides of the spectrum on that one. But thank you very much for your answering of questions.
Absolutely. And maybe one more finer point on this risk classification and the rationale behind it. The risk class is just the risk that a wildfire will burn through the area that your home resides, utilizing climate, fuels, weather, and topography, as we've stipulated. The downstream regulations, if you are in high and extreme and the WUI, provides you some protection that when a wildfire comes through, if you've done the defensible space and the home hardening, those future potential regulations, it gives you an opportunity to not have a catastrophic outcome. And that's what the intent of this bill is all about, is to reduce the occurrence of catastrophic outcomes, like the loss of houses, homes, property, and lives. And it's not gonna, if you do follow defensible space and home hardening techniques, it doesn't mean you're immune because you live in a high or extreme fire risk area, but it ups your chances, reduces the risk of a catastrophic outcome. And that's really what the intent is, and the hope that the defensible space and home hardening techniques will do downstream.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, Denise. Thank you, Mike. We'll move on to Elam. Hi, Elam, do you have a question? Please press your unmute if you have a question. Okay, nobody there. Let's go to Tim Casey.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions and a comment for the senator. The first question is can you describe the appeal process and who's going to be overseeing that? You might have discussed that earlier. I had to step away. And then the study that you folks presented, a lot of thought went into it, a lot of experts. But did anybody really consider the financial implication for homeowners and what this does as far as, a number of people have discussed insurance and really, at the end of the day, it's going to affect our property values as well. And then for the senator, we have 1,200 people online and it'd be an excellent opportunity to express, what you're doing to support this bill and the citizens and easing the impact, especially if there's, some kind of financial implications down the road that, maybe you can't get insurance, maybe, your property values drop. There's a lot of things that could happen. So I'll leave it up to you folks to explain that to me and we'll go from there.
Okay. Thank you for that question, Tim. So the Department of Forestry is responsible for the appeals process, and how that coincides with the risk map is we're reviewing the risk assignments to make sure that when as OSU developed the wildfire risk map, that it was consistent with the rules developed and adopted by the Board of Forestry, that it was consistent with the and within that the map was developed according to the law, as well as reviewing the information for any data errors to make sure there's no errors involved with the data itself or with the application of that data, and then reviewing it if there's any characteristics that would have a particular impact that would designate the wildfire risk class incorrectly with that, and then to evaluate those three criteria, and then see if the effect, if there's any if those additive effects would have a change to the wildfire risk class. That's what would be reviewing the appeals process for. So we're essentially, the Department of Forestry is serving as auditing of the OSU's work product through the appeals process. So as far as the review, there was notes in the before the rulemaking was completed. There was a fiscal impact statement that went with the rulemaking filed with the Secretary of State that did note that the potential for the number of property owners that would be impacted, and notes for regarding the potential impact to the increased cost of building new homes. The needing a contractor to perform defensible space, as well as an undeterminate amount at the time regarding impacts to property values and insurance. It was noted, but that there wasn't any data available with that filing.
Simply just a note, and there was no analysis, there was no study, there was no senator in Southern Oregon that stood up and said, hey, this is the impact to our community, and maybe there should be some additional consideration. We spent millions of dollars on this bill to date, and there's no protection for the homeowners. There's no representation for the homeowners to ease us into this. I get what you guys are trying to do. It makes sense, but at the end of the day, it's only 23% of us that are impacted, or 8%. I forget what the numbers were, but there was absolutely no consideration for how impactful this could be, and. Somebody earlier mentioned the insurance. This hasn't even gone into effect yet. The insurance companies are just waiting to jump onto this bill and probably amend policies and look down the road. So, Senator, this is an excellent opportunity for you to tell 1,200 people what your role in this is to protect us and make sure that we aren't severely impacted.
I guess I need to take a couple minutes here. Again, I think this is not what this one is for, but it's a fair question. Let me try to crunch down a lot of thinking. First of all, I'm going to take issue with you that there was no consideration and no discussion. There has been this bill has been about 4 years in the making, and throughout the entire process, there have been citizen committees and rule advisory committees that took great care to have representation from property owners, from realtors, from working people who strive to build a house. And these people put in thousands of hours trying to find the best balance among our values.
That's great.
So,
Senator, where was this mix of people? Where did this mix of people?
I wonder if you'd let me finish just a thought or two first. So the reality here is, and I very strongly feel this, our state and our communities are in imminent danger. If you are looking for a political leader who will say, I'm willing to make sure our communities have reasonable protection, nobody can say perfect protection these times, reasonable protection, and making sure there are no financial impacts on Oregonians, you are listening to someone who's lying. It's not one of our options. So for 4 years, dozens and dozens of people with very different interests have sat at the table and said, how can we balance all this? How can we implement a program that will do a better job of protecting our communities in a ferociously difficult environment and keep this affordable for Oregonians? So one of the answers is quite a bit of money in a variety of different grants for small woodland owners and homeowners to help with some of this work. Is there enough for every dollar for every person who's going to do it? No, there's not. So, this was my plea at the beginning for us to keep the big picture in mind. We are trying to defend our state from destruction and our communities. And I don't think anybody can say that's made up when you look at the record of what's happened to probably a dozen cities in Northern California and Oregon in the last years. It's right here. We don't need more demonstrations. What do we do about it? We develop the most robust program we can that has the best protection, financial protection we can possibly provide for people. And we move forward with it because we can't wait another few years, and we correct as we go. That was the decision of the majority of legislators. I won't take time to go into the insurance issue, which is a real issue, and people have made some important points. And I have some thoughts of some things we might want to do legislatively about that. Basically, someone who does everything they possibly can on their property should be sure to have access to insurance at a reasonable rate. And there might be some things we can do about that. But the insurance companies have told us when we asked them about the impact of this map and this bill, that since the Paradise Fire and even further, they have been developing their own maps. And the kinds of increases in premiums and difficulty some people have securing policies precede 762. So anyway, I want to keep it there. Again, I'm willing to engage with any folks.
I think Doug had his hand up. Doug, did you have something to add?
Senator, you make a good point. The insurance companies have already told you that they're evaluating the community, the area here in Southern Oregon. And so I think that, as our representative, that you would put your best foot forward to make sure that we are impacted as minimally as possible, that we're eased into this, that for some people, this could be catastrophic. If they can't afford their homeowners insurance, they're no longer going to have a home. And I'm surprised that, we had a focus group. I would imagine that it was here in Southern Oregon where we're being impacted, and it wasn't in Portland or Salem. But 4 years this has gone on, and the first I've heard of it was really when I received a letter last week saying, welcome to Southern Oregon. You can appeal this, and then the people here that are participating in this video conference, they came here for answers. How are they impacted? And we realize that we're in a high risk area or a moderate risk area, but at the end of the day, we don't know what those building codes really, what that might mean, or defensible space. What's that really going to mean? And our, all we received really is a risk map. and how we got to where we're at today with no real answers for the people online. So could anybody tell me how I'm going to be impacted financially? What's going to happen with my insurance? No.
Thank you for those comments. We're going to move on to the next question. Next question goes to Dana. Dana, your question, please. Dana,
can you hear me?
Mute. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thanks for taking my call. My very first concern tonight, and I have a couple or a few, is I want to request live speaking time at all of the live meetings. And mine in particular is in Grants Pass, because these Zoom calls are very disconnected from most of the public, half of the public, and most of the senior citizens. They have no idea how to Zoom, what Zoom means. It's very disconnected and unfair. So that's my first concern. We need live meetings, which I already have the schedule for. Number two, how many of the Oregon fires have been arson and that are not even our fault, but yet we are all going to be severely impacted on all of these fees? And also, after a 3-year pandemic, we are not born yesterday. We know that our homeowners insurance is going to be impacted. Our property taxes are going to be impacted. Our yearly fire dues are going to be impacted. And actually, one thing most people haven't even considered is our car insurances are going to be impacted, because your car sits on your property, which is in the higher the extreme place. And one thing I would like to say for everybody who is going to file an appeal, whether you do it yourself or whether you hire an attorney, keep in mind, we need a peer-reviewed review. We don't just need to take what somebody says as gold or God. We need a peer-reviewed review. And also take into consideration what is grandfathered in with your home and your property. We have all been through hell with this 3-year pandemic, and every single insurance is going to be impacted by this. I don't care what anybody says. This needs to be addressed. People need to have time and minutes at a live speaking review at all of the live meetings. I have listened to this meeting the whole night, and I can see that some people don't know how to use it. They're not technical savvy like some of us are. You need to take into consideration the senior citizens of the community and let their voices be heard as well as ours.
Thank you for those comments, Dana. You did have the one I want to address about there's about 2,200 fires across the state, wildfires. With those, about 60 to 70% of those are human caused, but human caused doesn't imply arson. Those designated as arson fires as a crime, those are prosecuted through a DA's office. That's less than 2 or 3% for that. So usually what we're seeing in those 2,200 there's 2,200 fires are lightning. That's that 30 to 40% that's not human caused, and then the remainder is folks cutting grass on their property, doing reburning and that seasonal burning, as well as up and down the highway with vehicles. Up and down I-5, you commonly see we have fires there as well. So that's that human caused fire portion is broad, but is a large aspect of the fire cause within the state, but it's not necessarily arson related.
I'm not saying that's 100% the case. I'm just saying that is a consideration. And what are our grandfathered clauses? What are those? What can we do about that? And what about the senior citizens that had no say tonight because they don't know how to Zoom? You're so disconnected with the average public, and they cancel the meetings and say that it is because of heat or whatever. People need to go to a location and be able to speak their minds and their opinions and their concerns, because this is going to affect every insurance on the broad spectrum.
Thank you for that, Dana. And we are going to try to get back in the community down south as soon as we can. We'll give some updates on that when we have the meetings. Doug Graff, you're on. Did you have a comment or question?
I did. Thank you, Tim. Was not introduced on the front end, was available if there were any specific questions my way. So by way of introduction, my name is Doug Graff. I serve as Wildfire Programs Director. This is a new position created with the Senate Bill passage of Senate Bill 762 to provide oversight with the 11 implementation agencies that received program development to advance fire protection in the state of Oregon. I've been listening very closely throughout the whole night. Well over 1,000 people attending. Wildfire is absolutely a critical issue. I appreciate the engagement today. I just wanted to share as listening, had a couple comments on a couple of those questions, but I'll stand by. I know the intent was focused on the map and the risk classifications and sharing information about appeals. There's a whole variety of other experts that'll be engaging relative to the mitigation measures in place, 762 for defensible space or hardening of homes. And that expertise falls in the State Fire Marshal or with the Building Codes Division. I would offer just a final comment. I'm not going to go back to my notes with all the specifics, but I moved from Department of Forestry as your Chief of Fire Protection with the Department of Forestry after serving 7 years. And my motivation to move into this position was really to support advancing fire protection in Oregon and taking the catastrophic nature out of catastrophic wildfire that we've been experiencing in Oregon. And I want to just leave you with a hopeful note that I truly believe that that is possible. It's possible on many fronts, and Senate Bill 762 is a wide-reaching piece of legislation that reaches from public health to response, to mitigation, to landscape resiliency, and to the defense measures we've been speaking today. I have an advisory council that's appointed by the legislature to continue to listen and involve advancement of fire protection in Oregon. Many of those members present. There was tonight, there's 19 members appointed to the council that'll be advising advancement Senate Bill 762. And I just leave you with appreciate the engagement here. Again, over 1,200 people, I think at its peak is impressive. This is critically important. And we're listening to advance fire protection here.
Thank you for those comments, Doug. We'll get back to some more questions. Mike and Jennifer. Mike and Jennifer, if you have a question.
Yes. First, I want to apologize to Mike from ODF and your entire team that you've been tasked by the state to take on this Senate Bill 762. I'm extremely frustrated that our tax dollars are being spent by creating such a flawed bill. I would ask Jeff Golden to go back to his team, redraft this Senate bill. This is a complete government overreach. Go back to the drawing board and look at the root cause instead of the mandates. So our homeless population has increased dramatically. Federal dollars are flowing into our county like crazy to help the homeless. And we're just, the feds are actually fueling the fire here by having the homeless population who has created quite a few of those fires. Federal lands are not adhering to defensible space, but the constituents are. There should be an absolute uprising over that. The other thing is, I'm curious, when the funding runs out for enforcement and staff, like Doug has a new job now because of the funding, what's going to happen? Are we going to have a new tax laid on us? How are we going to pay for this? And the last thing I'm curious about is if you excluded home hardening, small irrigated lawns, and fire-wise status in the mapping of this to create the defensible space and the building codes, why are we having building codes? Because if we are going to change our building codes to adhere to this, we'll never be able to get out of the risk map. So that is my final question is, if you excluded the home hardening, small irrigated lawns and firewise status in the risk map, and if we adhere to those policies that they lay in place, we'll still never get out of the high risk.
Yep. Thank you for that question. And that is, I'm gathering my thoughts on a second to gather everything you had in there. So apologies for taking a break on this. As for those aspects, you are correct. And as was mentioned, the implementation of building codes and creating defensible space doesn't necessarily remove that property from being in an area that is of higher extreme fire risk. What it does, though, is it increases the survivability and provides an opportunity for firefighters to defend that structure as well and provide for those life safety functions. I mean, think of it a little bit as similar to how seat belts don't stop you from getting into an accident, but they do prevent you from getting hurt while you're if you do get into one. And that's the similar connotations with the preventative measures, is to assist with that survivability, to assist with increasing opportunities for protection of life and property, is where the home hardening and the defensible space provisions do come into place with this, while not removing you from that higher extreme risk designation itself. That's essentially synonymous with the driving. The potential for an accident is always there, similar to having a wildfire occur within the state. And there are safety measures that we take to protect ourselves, and those are the two of those safety measures.
Thank you for that. Let's go to the next question. Jill, do you have a question?
Thank you to all the people on the panel and in the community. I do agree with most of everything that has been said tonight. My biggest concern is the insurance aspect of this. I think as any responsible homeowner will definitely be trying to make the defensible space and the home hardening done. But I have a concern that the insurance part of this was not even put into the bill whatsoever. So hopefully the senator can address that at that level. My question is, with the map, not that I want to have more things put in the high category or extreme category, but I live in Jacksonville. My house has been put on the high category. I live in a community, in a neighborhood with, irrigated lawns, etc. But I also own a cabin in the Wainema Fremont National Forest, and looking at the map, looking up the address, it's in the moderate range. We're in the middle of the forest right there. I'm not quite understanding the difference. I would think it would be flipped. So I'm just curious as to why that is.
So as there's when we're walking through the presentation, there was those two graphics that Dr. Dunn had displayed. One was the wildfire intensity portions, or the burn probability, and then the average flame length, the wildfire intensity. And where there's two areas overlap. There's designated areas where on the east side of the state we generally have a more robust or a higher frequency of return for wildfire. So as a more higher fire frequency, but due to the fuel loading, or lack of the burn intensity, the flame length is less. On the west side, we have the reverse. In Southern Oregon, then there's actually a correlation between the fuel loading and the high fire intensity, where both areas, both of the upper ends of those two thresholds do overlap. And that's why you've seen that as having a high risk in that Jacksonville area, as opposed to over in the Fremont and Wainema portions for that. So that was designated on some of those graphics, with Southern Oregon having those higher concentrations.
Hmm.
And maybe one more piece on that. Thanks, Tim. We would love you to reach out to us, and we have a phone number and an email that folks have. And I will apologize right up front for the delay in return if you are on that list. We have a significant call load and email load that we're trying to get through, and we're trying to staff up accordingly, realizing that we're in fire season and none of the people that we have been hired for this job, right? So this is additional work that we're trying to get through. So we're trying to get back to folks as quickly as possible. But I would recommend that you reach out to us so that one-on-one we can look at your properties and provide you a better answer. It's really difficult to speculate why in this forum those two might be different, because intuitively we would think something different, but there's possibly a very good reason. And that's one of the reasons that we're having these meetings tonight, is so that we can take input and encourage folks to reach out to us one-on-one so that we can get back to you and understand what those differences are and why that occurs, and look for potential refinements if there's been a mistake.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that.
Tim,
near the end here, but we'll take a few more questions. Tammy, do you have a question, Tammy?
Tim, this
Yes.
this is Brian Fordham from DFR, but I was wondering if I could just add a couple comments before we move on to the next question.
Okay.
Yeah,
Maybe if you'd hold a minute.
Sure. And so one of the comments I wanted to make, and I know Senator Golden mentioned this when he had shared a few comments previously, but I really want to impress into the audience who's called in tonight. The data that the insurance companies use is very robust. Insurance companies have been studying this sort of data for decades when they develop their rates. Not only do they look at catastrophic modeling to develop their rates, but they also look at their own claim performance. And so while this information is being used and being made public to you today, this information is something that they've already used internally within their own documents, within their own catastrophic modeling to develop rates, not from the state, of course, but from their own experience and their own models. When they look at risk, what they're studying is how likely a claim will be filed and how likely and how much it will cost. And so I just really want to impression on everyone that information like what you're looking at is not new information for an insurance company. So while there may be changes to rates, because that's a normal cycle of business, catastrophic models are typically updated 2 or 3 times a year, depending on catastrophes as they occur, that really this information is something that's already input into modeling that insurance companies use to establish rates. So I just want to leave that thought with everyone, because I know that Senator Golden spoke about this, but I want to make sure that folks understand that. So I do understand that rate changes do impact everyone, but the information that's being presented to everybody in this map, while that this may be the first time you may be seeing it as displayed this way.
You're repeating yourself.
I'm sorry, I'm muting myself. That information like this is something insurance companies already use. So that was just what I wanted to share with everybody, because I just want to make sure that folks understand that the information that's available to insurers when they develop rates and when they submit them to us, it must be actuarially justified, and we look to see to ensure that they've used information appropriately and so on. And so that's just what I wanted to share with everybody. Thanks, Tim.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Let's move on to Tammy. Tammy, do you have a question for us?
I do. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Great, thank you. I appreciate the magnitude of the task you guys have had before you for several years, and appreciate the summary of the categories used to create the risk factor to categorize from low to extreme risk. Is there going to be more detail available for property owners to understand the exact calculation of the number that was assigned to their property that was used to categorize their property? We've got 60 days to file appeals, and to understand that exact criteria would be really beneficial for us in understanding how to even file an appeal and to understand if in fact we believe there was an error made. I know that in individual property research, we can look up the general categories and the layers in the GIS, but is there more data available to really understand the actual calculation and the criteria in greater detail?
Yes, there are both process guides for detailed step-by-steps of how the wildfire risk map, as well as the wildland urban interface, both guides for those developments are integrated into as resources in the Oregon Wildfire Risk Explorer. So when you search your property in there with the homeowners report, there's links to there are links in that that report itself, as well as in the splash screen when it displays to walk through the process of how that was designated. And that homeowners report has the numbers in there as well. If you have any issues with, if anyone has any issues with getting their reports done or downloading that information or finding it, I'm going to leave our email address for this is sb762.rulemaking@odf.oregon.gov, and we're happy to help walk through that process and get that information to folks if they have any challenges finding it. But happy to provide that and walk through those. The phone number again is in the letter, as Mike mentioned. We're working through as expeditiously as possible to get back to folks, and working through that process with a team of folks to get people the resources they need and their questions answered as well.
Great, thank you. I appreciate it. The last follow-on would just be, will there be future opportunities for property owners to appeal their designation after this initial 60 days?
Every time the map's updated, the appeal window reopens.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next one goes to Kathy. Kathy Herman, can you hear us?
Yes. Two quick questions. One, are appeals going to be addressed in the order received, or will they be processed in a batch at the end of the appeals period?
So a bit of both. Right now we're gathering and looking for areas where we're having appeals come from the same general area, to see if there's that area of concern we've been discussing of where we can put boots on the ground to walk through a community that has where there is a concentrated number of appeals, and with that, as well as walking through them in the order received. Currently, we're working through identifying where our focus areas are for that, and then that'll be addressed there, and we'll be working through those appeals as quickly as we can. For that form, if there's any missing information on it, the form helps us make sure we can get back into contact with you if we have any questions as we go through that appeals process, and to make sure we have all the information to consider as we walk through that. So okay. a little bit of both of it for those processes, Kathy.
Okay, and then the second question was just a little bit of a follow-up on Tammy's, I think. And it regards the mapping of the fuel data and how that
I'm going to be on.
Sorry, how that figures into the calculation, specifically numerically, how that works into the formula. I haven't been able to find that specific information. The layers just show basic colors, but not the actual formulas or designations.
I'm going to have to refer that one to Dr. Dunn if that's in the guide that OSU has put together for that, and where to find those.
Yeah, Kathy, the easiest place to start would be on our OSU website. We have the methodology outlined there. We also have technical guides. The specific equation is to assess burn probability, which we do through a Monte Carlo simulation process, which is we simulate 10 to 20,000 fire seasons with the calibrated large fire occurrence, calibrated to the historical fire occurrence, constrained to the location where fires occur. And so it basically creates a map layer that says the number of times each section of the land is intersected by a wildfire. And you sum those up, that is the number of times the place is intersected by the number of simulations you do, and it gives you a probability of that site burning. That gets multiplied by those response functions that I showed in the presentation. And then that gives you a expected loss number, and then that's what is compared to the thresholds for those classes. I know that's a wonky answer. You sounded like you were into a technical equation question. So I would start with our technical guides and the online resources, and then reach out to us at OSU Wildfire Risk at OregonState.edu for additional questions, and we're happy to sit down with you and work through that.
Thank you.
Yep.
Question? Guest access? Do you have a question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I need to take a question with Brian. I actually received 3 notices, but I was actually made aware of the map about 3 weeks ago when my renewal came up on one of my properties, and the insurance company, which happens to be Travelers, let me know that they were not going to be renewing because of the designation of extreme wildfire. And I'm like, what are you talking about? That's how I was able to access the map, and I had no recourse. And so I had to shop other insurance companies. And the result is that I was able to get insurance through Safeco because they were the cheapest, but my rate basically doubled. So this insurance issue that people are asking about has already happened. Now, I also own light industrial property on the outskirts of Grants Pass, and I was noticed by my broker that because the renewal's coming up and they're reviewing it because that property is considered high risk. And you know what? That property is several acres. It's mainly pavement and gravel and steel buildings. And I'm looking at potentially paying thousands of dollars more per year for those 2 lots. So the insurance issue isn't well, we've been notified. I would be more than glad offline to provide the documentation, but this is going to cause a huge issue for property owners, both on the homeowner side as well as the business side. And it's a huge red flag.
Yeah, no, thank you. I certainly appreciate that. And I would like to get your information so that I can investigate that.
I didn't know how to put my name in here, but the thing is, I was hoping that I could get on here because the insurance issue is already being looked at by the major carriers. And so the thought that they've been looking at this over many years or whatever, that's absolutely. They're using the information today and they're accessing the map today.
Well,
and I've got a broker that, I own, anyway, I'm just trying to put this out there that it's happening now. And it just happens that my renewals just came, the one happened already. And the cost difference was about $2,000 for 1 year. And that was the cheapest. Out of 12 companies, only 4 were willing to go forward with coverage.
Right. Okay. So when I say they're doing this today, what I mean to say is insurers, as a function of creating rates, use catastrophic modelings and statistical modelings in today's current environment.
They're looking at the map that has been put up by ODF. They showed me. I didn't even know that it existed. Now, I got the letters at the end of last week, but this happened 3 weeks ago.
Okay,
and so I called them out on it, and they actually sent me to the website. That's the insurance companies are already accessing the map that was put up by ODF. Okay, so it's definitely the carbon. That map should never. So the classification, I'll give you. There's a couple of other things, but the insurance companies are accessing that map, and they're using it. Okay, and I can't begin to tell you the amount of hours and time that I spent trying to argue this with. You hear the frustration.
We understand your question, but
no, I'm not. It's not a question. I'm letting you know that the insurance companies are already using the map, the ODF map, and because I was trying to find out where the heck did you come up with the fact that my home, it has a extreme wildlife designation. They took me to the map.
Doug has his hand up here. Maybe he has a comment for you.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Thank you, sir, for the question. Just my presence really expands the conversation, and I really wanted to honor the focus on the map and the risk and the appeals conversation tonight. But this is compelling, folks, and I'm glad you showed up and really broadened the conversation. I wanted to give some detail relative to my responsibilities in this new position. The legislature tasked me in law specifically, to monitor and assess any financial impacts to the activities on local jurisdictions and the equity of those financial impacts among those jurisdictions. So we need to develop that process. I'll be seeking counsel from the Wildfire Programs Advisory Council on how to measure and assess that. And specifically, sir, to your point, the legislature, anticipating, challenges for the future also charged me with, cataloging future improvements to further reduce wildfire risk in Oregon, and specifically called out insurance companies regarding insurance policy coverage provisions, underwriting standards, insurance rates, and other topics relevant to enhancing the protection of property from wildfire at a reasonable cost. So it certainly didn't go into this conversation blind, and I'm going to do everything I possibly can working with the organization, our insurance commissioner, and Brian Fordham here to monitor that and really leverage the provisions to our advantage to sustain a healthy market. Because as we reduce catastrophic risk through hardening of homes or defensible space standards, then the insurer's risk should also go down. So I really want to have those conversations and lead that conversation with Oregon's insurance market and partner with them to ensure
what you have to recognize. I'm sorry. What you need to recognize is that they're already using the map that has been provided as a tool. Now, on the insurance side, they can't cancel your insurance. But when it comes up for renewal, they can do one of two things. They can either kick the rate up, or they can basically say they're not going to renew it. So that's the situation that's facing the 80,000 plus property owners. And it was a jaw dropper. When I saw that map, I actually had to reach out to some of the people that I know because I was completely unaware that was happening. And then, of course, in the letters showed up late last week. But like I said, just on one property, which is
we thank you for your concerns, but we have a lot of other
it's not
questions.
A concern. It cost me $2,000 more.
Tim, I'd like to close if I could.
Okay, one last comment for Doug.
Would you like to look into it?
We're going to have to move on.
Would you like to confirm the information?
Yeah, we need to confirm that. It hasn't reached the Division of Financial Regulations at this point, and I know Brian's ears are up right now. We'll want to work with you on that.
I sent Jeff Golden a email.
Thank you.
With the contact information.
Okay. I'm sorry, but we're going to move on to our next question. We're going to do 3 more questions and then kind of wrap it up. So, John Ellis, your question, please. John?
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, very good. Unfortunately, I have a couple questions, and I'll make them quick because I know you want to get through this. The first question is directed toward you, Brian. Have you been in contact with the California Insurance Commissioner? Because this whole fire mapping thing is not something unique just to Oregon. California went through this probably 10 years ago. And what the insurance companies actually did is what was stated earlier. They did not renew policies to the point where the insurance commissioner had to take legal action against the insurance companies. My suggestion is somebody's already been down this road. They might be able to help you out there. The question I have regarding the mapping tonight, there's a big emphasis on defensible spaces, on creating fire-safe communities, doing all these things. Yet there seems to and appears to be a disconnect between the map and the appeal process and the things that property owners can do. The appeal process appears that it's just specifically to what the study was by the state of Oregon, by Oregon State University. However, a property owner, if they do all the defensible space, fire-wise safe communities and everything, they're still going to be classified the same, because it appears that this is a satellite imagery that is done basis for the mapping of the study. You have an upper canopy, which really truly does not show any of the lower canopy, where if there's been any fuel modifications from a vegetation management program or anything like that. My question is there going to be an integration of all these? And then the next question is, the map is renewed 5 years, and there's only a 60-day window here for appeal. Is there going to be anything before 5 years that people can do?
So for that, as we walk through, those 4 criteria that guide the map, the one that is is able to be manipulated is vegetation, and that's one of the challenges with developing this. Is the 4 criteria we had that were within the law were very specific to remove subjectivity or the influx of it from the creation of the map. So it put a very objective lens on its creation. So utilizing that appeals process, we're looking at make sure that that data is correct in all those factors, as well as that vegetation to capture if the vegetation manipulation that was done on a particular property would influence a change in that risk class as well. So
So an individual then would have the opportunity in the appeals in this 60 days, if they've done defensible space, or if they feel based upon a fuel modification, their property is classified wrong, they should include it in the appeals?
There is a place for adding additional information. There's for pertinent facts, you can add attachments. Right now, people are sending in, taking pictures and sending them in with the appeals form as well. So those additional aspects of it, as well as that having that phone number so that we can contact folks as well to understand what the additional materials they're sending to us along with their appeal forms are, is important to that. So folks are attaching pictures. Some are even working through taking screenshots from videos to show that with their appeals when they do turn in their appeals forms. So that's the one aspect for that, of where to turn in to show that, capture that there has been a change in what's perceived from a satellite image. The other aspect or part of your question is, when we do the appeals process, it's a review of the of successful appeals as well, for that, to make sure that we don't send them, establish someone in a unintended risk class again. So there is part of that process, but as well as letting folks know ahead of time that that there is an update to the map, that these are where we're seeing some of the changes in those other factors, where we've had where we've had a weather condition change, or the long-term outlook with a climate condition change, where we're seeing those factors in there, where a large fire may have lowered wildfire risk in a particular area. That's so we can have these conversations ahead of time before we implement a new effective date on a new map, as well as let folks know, hey, this is coming up. That 60-day window is going to open at a certain point in time. You're going to expect to receive a letter, and then the information as well for this process, but also let us do a check to make sure that if someone was inadvertently in high risk and they should be low risk, and through that appeals process, we found an error, that makes sure that we don't have them go through the administrative burden of reappealing. So we're going to be looking at that for the successful appeals as well, to make sure that those folks don't have to go through it again.
To make it simple, and I'm an old fireman, kind of needed old black and white. If somebody has done defensible space and it is significant enough, will that affect the rating for their property?
It has the potential to affect the rating for that. I want to add a clarification with that, is the ratings are a wide range. There's 1.8 million tax lots in the state. They all have unique ratings with it. So, but everything's in 5 buckets. So to change your risk class, you have to move to another bucket for that. So on those areas, and I try to be as cut and dry for some of this, but with the vegetation, it would be reviewed to make sure that it was in the right class and see if that change in value would change the risk class. And that's what we're looking at in the appeals process.
Thank you. And Brian, could you answer my question? Have you been in touch with the California Insurance Commissioner?
I'm sorry, John. You've asked several questions. We're going to move on to Jack next. If we have time, somebody can come back to you, but in the interest of fairness.
So can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can, Jack.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So I really appreciate the challenge and the difficulty that you guys are dealing with all this right now, as well as us. So my questions are 3, and I want to just throw them all out. And they're actually really much more to the ground and not as big as some of these other ones, which are so important. But first of all, in our area in Southern Oregon, the Talent Irrigation District, who is responsible for the tall grass that grows up along the edges of the ditch? And I see it all along our property and beyond. That's one question. We have neighbors who have really tall grass, and how do I, as their neighbor, deal with the fact that they haven't cleaned up their mess, and it's an extremely fire-prone situation? And then my third question, which is a little bit bigger and more general, and that is there going to be money available for homeowners to deal with all of these various issues that you guys are bringing up tonight? Is it part of the bill? Are there federal monies available? Are there grants that I can apply for to get some of this stuff on my property cleaned up to fit the requirements that are needed here? Those are my 3 questions.
Okay, and I think I got them written down here. So there are resources available for the implementation of, what you characterize mostly as the defensible space requirements that may come out of the defensible space code. So there will be a grant program that's being developed by the Office of the State Fire Marshal to help property owners and Oregonians to be able to address what they're being required to do and have some of that financial assistance, recognizing that a lot of folks can't do the work on their own and need assistance, either being able to get a contractor or a fire crew or something to that effect to help with that. As far as the responsibilities, there's for the Talent Irrigation District and neighbors, and we'll lump those 2 together. It puts it on the property owner has the responsibility to meet the requirements of the bill for those designated. So that's talking with your neighbor, working with your local fire department. As the defensible space code is implemented, there are some enforcement actions around that as through that implementation. So as that gets implemented in January here, those enforcement provisions will be available, as well as the boots on the ground to do these educational aspects about the why that this work is important, and to assist folks with coordinating them with those financial resources.
Okay, I appreciate those answers. And I guess, it's going to be 109 degrees here supposedly tomorrow. And so as I watch this grass growing, I have a hard time waiting till January to see some of that, helped out. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. For our last question of the night, Mike, are you there, Mike?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mike. We can hear you.
Good. Going back 3 or 4, 5 questioners ago, there was a couple of good questions about your homeowner's report and the risk assessment, and it comes from the risk value that's calculated. And it strikes me that if you're going to go after an appeal, you're going to need to really look at what that risk number is and if there's an error in it. And while your report provides the risk value that's the basis for which category you're in, it doesn't provide any of the supporting values that are used to sum together to create that risk. So, there's a burn probability and the susceptibility that your website shows that it's the sum of those 2 factors, the product of those 2 factors, but that's not included. And I don't see how we can even make a reasonable appeal without having some information to look for errors. And I can't find anything in there that is going to tell me what my property, what that breakdown is. see if I got something to appeal.
So with that, Mike, that's a great question. And then we walk through, direct folks to that homeowners report, as that's the customized report for your property. And I do want to precursor that we're working through for folks who don't necessarily have a property address. We're working through ways of navigating folks to those properties to help get them their reports as well. But for the you get the risk value associated with that. And then it also assists with the risk classes there. The additional resources do assist with gaining some of that background for that, but just the aspect of initiating the appeal automatically, those values that Dr. Dunn walked through will be reviewed for accuracy by the department. That's an instant trigger when the appeal is sent in, because those requirements are in law of review of both the make sure that it was consistent with the application of the law and the administrative rules, as well as verifying that the data was accurate. So those Mike, as you those numbers that aren't necessarily in the report and combined into that overall risk rating, all the numbers that build up to that are reviewed in that process automatically.
Well, but you review them, but you don't reveal them. I think those need to be revealed to us in order to even assess ourselves.
Okay.
I don't think you should even open the appeal period until that's made publicly available, as I think you're handcuffing us on even preparing our appeals without full data. We need the data. That's anyway.
Yeah. I hear exactly what you're saying, particularly on that susceptibility side. We have that data for you, certainly, and anyone else in this call. And feel free to reach out to us, and we can diagnose that with you. We'll look for a more permanent solution, because I think you're right. It is useful information.
Thank you. As I said, I think you should pause the appeal period until you make that available. I don't think you're being fair to us otherwise. And I realize you're dealing with the legislation. Jumping to a different topic, you're dealing with the legislation that was given to you, but there's a lot of other factors that ought to be used to give a more fair score, such things as the availability of roads for access, because they make a big difference in the survivability. And other factors, and the fact that you ignored all the groundwork that gets done and everything else, like a lot of other people have said.
Thank you, Mike, for your questions and comments. We're going to go ahead and wrap it up tonight. Jason's going to post some resources up here, some addresses, website, phone numbers, I think. And then Chief Mike Shaw's going to have some closing comments. Again, we're sorry we couldn't get to all your questions. There were more than 200 questions in the queue when we started, and we went through a lot of them. But I'll hand it over to Mike for some closing comment.
Thank you, Tim. Just wanted to take a couple minutes to say thanks to folks. Clearly, this is a very significant issue for folks, and it is for us as well. I.e., we're 2.5 hours in and still going strong. The last time I saw, as I look at it now, there's still 600 folks tuned in, and there was a lot of questions unanswered. And our goal, as I stated at the beginning, is to reach out and get every question answered. And so utilize these resources here, our website, our phone number. Please be patient with us. I implore you. We are absolutely buried with this work, as you would imagine. The folks that were here tonight represent Southern Oregon. We have folks across Eastern Oregon and in Northwest Oregon and all up and down the Willamette Valley that have some of the same questions. And we're going to continue this public information outreach to try and gather as much information as we can so that we can make the correct refinements and address the concerns to the best of our abilities. At the end of the day, our goal is to make this right, realizing we're trying to thread the needle, and it's very difficult. And you folks have highlighted several very key concerns that we're going to be taking back and working collectively to try and find resolution to. And so, again, we will work hard to try and find a time. Again, realizing we're in the middle of fire season and this week's weather is pretty significant. And we may have some other key business that gets in the way and slows things, but we will come back to Southern Oregon and schedule some more time to answer folks' questions and make sure that everything is addressed to the best of our ability. So again, thank you folks. Appreciate your time, your patience with us, and look forward to further outreach to us from you and our ability to help you understand where we're at and where we're going. So good night, and please be safe.